Hey, what's up? It's Jim, and today I'm going to talk about Kamikaze 89, or Kamikaze 1989. This is a rare and rarely even seen in America German kind of cult film and the last acting role of Rainer Werner Fassbinder. And it is kind of towards the exact end of the German New Wave, which would happen when Fassbinder died from his heart exploding from doing way too much cocaine. It's very much in that style of the German New Wave, but it is also this strange, weird cult movie with an interesting soundtrack by Edgar Froese, I think, from Tangerine Dream, and this weird dystopian, utopian future of what they thought 1989 would be like in 1982. It is a very odd movie, and maybe one you probably shouldn't try to understand the plot, because it's probably not really about that. It's just really about being this strange cinematic find while also having a really good lead performance from Fassbinder. It's very much an experience of a cinematic find. It's what you want, like kind of a unique, strange movie that you never thought could exist, and I didn't even really know existed. I thought I had heard of it before, but I really didn't know about it till this week, till a theater around me, the BAM Cinematheque, decided to play this film for 1 week. I don't know if it's ever coming back into theaters or when the Blu-ray's coming or anything like that, but I was very happy to have seen it because it's just one of those cinematic finds that you can't believe existed, and also can't believe how right it was about the satire it was saying, what would possibly happen to us in our future, how we would take on media, and what would happen in the coming 80s and 90s. In the possible 1989 future that this film takes place in, Germany is the biggest economy in the world, and no one is unemployed, and there's lots of money, and everyone is happier and healthier. And in the big corporate media company that runs most of this has a bomb threat, so they send Police Lieutenant Jensen, who is played by Fassbinder, to go investigate what's going on. They never exactly find out who placed the bomb threat, but it sends him on an investigation through finding out how deep this media conspiracy goes and what exactly is going on the 31st floor. This is probably a film that's more for people who are aware of the German New Wave. I think this would be a difficult film to get through for someone who isn't aware of that kind of style, and it is made by a lot of people who were big mainstays of that, where you have people like Brigitte Mira and obviously Fassbinder and his cinematographer Xavier Schwarzenberger, I think, and even Franco Nero, who is in Fassbinder's last couple movies, or at least last one. And it very much feels like, you know, another movie a lot of these people worked on, and right before Fassbinder would work on his last two films before his death. It actually came out after he died, or at least in America. I get the impression it came out maybe in film festivals or in Germany about a month after he died. And I noticed when I saw the screen, there were a lot of people fidgeting. There were a lot of people kind of not wanting to admit they probably didn't like the movie because they had the honor of seeing it, and that's pretty cool. Hey, why not? But I don't really necessarily think it's the kind of film for most people, but if you're a big cinephile and this kind of film, just the idea of Fassbinder playing a detective in a dystopian society with a cool electronic 80s score appeals to you, then this is probably the right movie for you. Fassbinder is really good as a detective. I think he does that kind of noirish, like drunken, angry, given up on society kind of a role while also trying to investigate it. He's probably given up, but he still has a little faith. But in this society, it is illegal to drink and you have to smuggle it, but he smuggles it anyway. I like his kind of disgruntled film noir-ish take on it. I like how serious he is, but there's a lot of people who try to be serious in this film and it just comes off as maybe a little more boring. But Fassbinder's performance, you kind of understand why he's so disenfranchised with this society. He's able to communicate through his performance. One of the bigger things about this film is, as the corporatization and as these advances keep going, is society getting better or is it getting more boring and worse? And it made me think a lot about how the 80s were really the end of the 70s. I mean, obviously, chronologically they were, but in terms of the ideas of the 70s, it was the end of that. It was bringing about more like kind of conservative ideas in terms of art and culture, and that would kind of continue through the 90s and even today. I mean, certainly a lot of what they have, like the people who are kind of more worshipping things like superheroes, like the Superman phone in this and that Captain America car, which you can see in the trailer, where people's minds are and what's important to them are changing. And it's not this radical, hard-drinking ideas that were there before, like that was outdated and that was not going to be as good for humanity in terms of this dystopian or utopian future. And I think that is an interesting idea, particularly coming from the early 80s, because you look at that and you go, oh shit, it's like they kind of knew what was coming, or at least something that you're like, oh shit, that that did happen. As more money got in, that is what happened. We started to lose the kind of crazier, more freewheeling ideas that we had before and became a little less experimental, a little less interesting. I was kind of surprised how on it was about that, but while you're watching this film, it just seems like an odd assortment of things. The kind of laughing at it as a cult movie wears off pretty quick, and I noticed in the audience there are less people laughing at his leopard print suit, which I actually think kind of works for him in that odd cult movie way. Just all the odd ideas, even the character of Anton played by Gunther Kaufman, who is another Fassbender mainstay, even like his bike and his outfit, it feels very much like the new wave, like Duran Duran and stuff. Not the German new wave, the music new wave, I guess. That was more of that style, like early MTV new wave bands from England kind of thing. That kind of style is going all throughout it because, you know, hey, that was the cool new thing at the time. Style-wise, this feels very much early 80s, as it came out in Germany in 1982 and came out in America in 1983. So, you know, it's like that era very much so. It's such an odd, strange film, and the flow of it's very weird. While I was watching, I was like, what have I happened onto, really? That's what I kept thinking. I like the score by Edric Froese, who I think is from the Tangerine Dream. I'm not exactly sure. It says him and the Tangerine Dream in the opening credits, I believe, but then other people just credit him and other people credit the Tangerine Dream, so I'm not sure what that's all about. But it was a really interesting, awesome score, and you can listen to it on YouTube, or at least when I shot this video you could. And I really, really like the score a lot. I think that's kind of what will probably in the trailer turn you on the most. Oh, cool, like this kind of imagined 80s thing that we make today actually existed. When you get into that, you see how more of the influence at the time were things like Bergman, and the slower pace of certain films aren't really what we're used to nowadays. So I think a lot of what Kamikaze 89 represents is the thing that this film is worried about in the future, that this kind of a thing could be completely erased. And in a way, the idea of something like Kamikaze 89 is gone. The media corporation probably did get rid of it because it's not something audiences like as much as they used to, but that's what makes it so cool. You know, I read the Vincent Canby New York Times review, and he said it was more of a footnote to film history, and yeah, that's probably true. It's not necessarily a Fassbender film. It's directed by Wolf Grimm, who this was his last theatrical film. He ended up going to TV after this, and he was a close friend with Fassbender. Obviously, he understood with the German New Wave ending, he needed to find something else to do, which is kind of sad, but I think this isn't a Fassbender film, and although he had acted in smaller roles than in other films, I think when you're thinking of the end of his career, you wouldn't necessarily think of this film because he's obviously far more famous for being a director. It's an interesting footnote in that you're like, oh, and watch this weird, strange little cult sci-fi movie he made in the early 80s. It's not something you're probably going to like as much as his films. I haven't seen a lot of his films, but I don't really like it versus the films of his I have seen, and it does feel like that tired 70s partier who did too much cocaine has kept going for far too long, and the 80s are starting to catch up with him. You can kind of see that on his face, and you can almost see that throughout this film, like they're worried about that way of life ending. And at this time you would get MTV, you would get more of the corporatization of the music industry, you would get more of the corporatization of being cool. The end of disco and the beginning of the 80s really signifies more of the corporations taking up Hollywood studios and record labels. So Kamikaze 89 actually gets right a lot of those things, sadly, and as the economy did better, you probably had less fun on TV, you had less weirder things. If you look at what happened to cable TV, you had channels that used to be weirder and fringier, and then suddenly they have a big hit and it becomes like another CBS. It's a really sad, boring kind of thing that has happened, and it's not necessarily a lot of fun. It's interesting how right Kamikaze 89 was about that. I really like how it's kind of like finding this weird stranger person that is outdated, but listening to their thoughts and kind of realizing how much they were right about things even though they don't know what's going on anymore. This isn't representative of something like that, but as a cinematic find, and that's how they're selling this film, and that's why you're seeing this film and probably watching this review, is this is an interesting one at that. Sure, it's a footnote and all that stuff, and Vincent Canby is fairly right in his review. I think this is a interesting enough of a film to have seen if you do find it, because you'll be sitting there like, wow, this is something else, and it certainly is. The whole time I was watching Kamikaze 89, I thought like, what an odd, strange little movie, and I kind of sometimes wish I had gotten to seen it earlier. I wish it was a little more available because of its weird kind of time capsule of the German New Wave and the early 80s, and with its weird electronic music that makes everything seem more sinister and odd and interesting and futuristic in that 80s way where you weren't sure where all this technology was going to take us, but it's probably not going to be anything good. Kamikaze 89 was not even sure where culture was going to go, but it didn't really like it. And investigating it and seeing like where culture was going wasn't as cool as it used to be. That's probably what itself makes this film such an interesting cinematic find, is because this kind of thing isn't as cool as it used to be, but by being its own unique self and by being a thing that I can't really think of any other film like this, it's probably cooler than all that shit, and that's what's so awesome about it. But it's not maybe a film I would probably watch again or anything like that, but I'm certainly glad I have seen it, and it was really the cinematic find that it lives up to be. And if you want to see Kamikaze 89 and seeing Fassbender in his last role before his heart exploded for doing too much cocaine really interests you, then this is a cinematic must-see for you, and it will live up to all of that. So if you have seen Kamikaze 89 and you would like to talk about it, then comment below in the comments and subscribe if you would like to.